working class thoughts. So, before I get into this episode, I do want to say it's not one of my favorite historical people, but and often whenever I getting into episodes about people from different countries, sometimes if I can't say the name right, I'll try to remember to spell it out. So if that happens, that's what's going on with that. So, anyways, Elizabeth Bathory was actually born 1560 or 1561 in Nyírbátor, Hungary, which is Nyirbator. And she spent her childhood at the Assad Castle, and her father so happened to be the Baron George Bathory, who was already paetician of the Assad branch of the family. And he was actually the brother of Andrew Bonaventura Bathory. And he had been one of the highest ranking officials of Transylvania. Now, keep this in mind, though. Her mother was Baroness Anna Bathory, and she was a daughter of Stephen Bathory, who was another high-ranking official of Transylvania. Now, he was part of the Somalia branch, which is Somylo. So through her mother, Elizabeth was actually was the niece, sorry, not nine. She was the niece of the Hungarian noble Stephen Bathory, who was a king at the time of Poland. And he was also the Grand Duke of Lithuania of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And he was also a prince of Transylvania. Her older brother was Stephen Bathory, and he became a judge royal of Hungary. Now, during her childhood, Elizabeth suffered seizures and it was rumored to be caused by epilepsy, which was stemming from the inbreeding of her parents. Now, let me just go into a little bit of historical fact here. A lot of people feel like people of the royal bloodline suffer from different type of disabilities that are carried over through different generations as a result of inbreeding, because one person would get married into another royal family, and there's only so many royal families within a section. So over a period of time, it became inbreeding, or even just they just marrying their niece or cousins. It was very commonly done within royal families back in the day. So that's where they're saying that this actually come from. So here's a little history lesson. During this time period, symptoms of epilepsy was actually called falling down sickness. Now, treatments included rubbing blood on the non-sufferer on the lips of the epileptic. So while you were having your seizures, they would take that other person's blood and then they would rub it on your lips. It's kind of eerie when you think about it. But anyways, or giving them a mix of a non-sufferer blood and a piece on actually sertum in a skull. Now, and they would do this until their episode ended. So basically what they do is they would take that skull, they would take the blood, and they would just hold it over their face until the episode actually would end. And some say it actually explains why she did what she did later in her life while her husband was away at war. So, however, some actually say she was actually trained by her family to be cruel. As some stories say Elizabeth witnessed brutal punishments executed by her family's officers and being taught by her family to be involved with Satanism and witchcraft, although no evidence had ever been found for these reasons. Really? No evidence. So here's the deal. To explain later on the barbarity of Elizabeth Bathory's crimes, or the quote-unquote so-called crimes, they just simply said that it was because the family practiced Satanism, and that's the reason for it. And this is just something that was done whenever people were trying to find an excuse back in the day. They would just say, oh, it was demons, it was the devil, it was this, it was that, it was them influencing them, blah, it was them influencing them. So it was just something that was commonly done back in the day. And it was continued during the witch hunts later on. So anyways, let's get back to the matter at hand. So Elizabeth was raised as a Protestant, and she was actually educated in Latin, German, Hungarian, as well as Greek. And since she actually came from a noble family, she naturally had wealth, education, and a stellar position in life. Because, hey, she was a princess. So, of course, she had the best of everything. So, however, by the age of 10, she was actually engaged to Fernek Nadisdi, Nadasdy. So, he was the son of Baron Thomas Nadis, D. Nadis Fergan, and Ursula Kanze, Kanizsay. It was a political arrangement naturally, however, within circles of of royalty and like the rich and the powerful. It was to help themselves. So although she was getting married to another prince, Elizabeth knew her living status was actually way higher than his. So even though she was younger than him, because remember how young she was 10, right? She refused to change her last name. She said, "Nah, man, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. I ain't gonna take you. You know what I mean? I ain't taking your name. You're taking my name. I'm way better than you." That's basically what that was. So when they got married, he actually took the name Bathory, and they got married when she was 15 and he was 19. So at the palace, and this took place at the palace of Vernon, Vranov, for yeah, Nod Tapul, or Varano in Hungarian, on May 8th, 1575. Now keep this, man. 4,500 guests actually attended the wedding, and Elizabeth moved into the castle in Serval and spent much of her time on her own while her husband studied in Vienna and then later went off to war. In fact, it was Nadi's wedding gift was his actual castle, Cachtique castle. It was situated in present-day Slovakia, and it was also included a country house and 17 adjacent villages next to it. The castle was and still remains surrounded by a village and agricultural farms going around it. And it was in 1578, Nadis became the chief commander of the Hungarian troops, leading them to war against the Ottomans. While her husband was away at war, Elizabeth had to manage all of the business affairs and the estates completely. So she had to take sole responsibility for the Hungarian and the Slavic people, including their medical treatment. So during the Long War of 1593 and 1606, she was charged with keeping a defense for her husband's estates, and because it was on the route to Vienna. In fact, it created a very significant threat for both her castle, and all of the surrounding villages of the Cadiz. It had been plundered by the Ottomans before, and they knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to take it again, because again, it was key on the route to the to Vienna. Hold on. It's going to get better here in a minute, I promise. This is just that basic prehistory stuff. So now, keep in mind that Elizabeth was an educated woman. She could read and write in 4 languages. There was a lot of cases where she actually intervened on behalf of destitute women, especially women whose husbands were captured by the Turks, and women whose daughters were raped and impregnated by force. So now Elizabeth's daughter, she did have a daughter, and her daughter's name was Anna Nadis, and was born in 1585. She had children with Nicole Zarinsky, and she had another daughter of Ursula Nadis. Kata Nadis, 1594, and nobody knows exactly when she died. Now, Adras Nadis, 1596 through 1603. Paul Nadis, 1598 through 1650. All of Elizabeth's children were actually cared for by governess, just as she had been when she was a child. Now, before I go any further, I want to explain that. So in royal families, often what happens is the child is born, right? And it's like the mother cares naturally by breastfeeding for the child, but then after that, the governess, which is a person, is like the queen's caretaker and like closest companion. You know what I mean? The go to her left hand person, and that person normally takes sole responsibility of raising the kids, and the kids actually rarely see their parents except for like different functions or something happens and they need to be seen. And I'm not saying that that is like every single time the case, but that is often the case. So now Elizabeth's husband actually died January 4th, 1604, at the age of 48 years old. Now, although the exact nature of his illness, which led to his death, is actually speculated, it was in 1601 that he started complaining of a severe pain in his legs. And from that, he actually never fully recovered. So 1603, he was permanently disabled. Elizabeth and him were married for a total of 29 years. However, before dying, Fernach Nadis entrusted all of her husband's heirs, or all of his heirs and widow, meaning the protection of Elizabeth, to Godfrey Thurzo, who would eventually say, you know what, I want all this stuff for myself. Why should she get it? So he led an investigation into her supposed crimes. So, anyways, let's move on into those supposed crimes. So, between 1602 and 1604, rumors of Elizabeth's atrocities began to spread like wildfire through all the kingdoms. And Lutheran minister Istvan Mavari has spread or made official complaints against her on behalf of the village people. This was done in public and in court officially in Vienna. Naturally, Hungarian authorities took a lot of time to respond to Meyer's complaints because she was a queen after all. She's no longer a princess, she was a queen. So, in 1610, King Matthias II assigned Gorgis Thorzo, the person that's in charge of her protection. Keep that in mind here. To Palatine of Hungary to investigate officially. So he ordered two notaries to collect evidence in March of 1610. During 1610 and 1611, they collected testimony from 300 plus witnesses. 300 plus, man. Damn. So, anyways, the official trial, including testimony of 4 defendants as well as 13 witnesses, priests and noblemen, were actually questioned. Witnesses included the castle official and other personnel of the Savar castle that she lived in, meaning her employees. According to official testimonies, Elizabeth's victims were servant girls aged 10 to 14 years old, the daughters of local peasants. So many were promised by the castle officials with offers of well-paid work as maids and servants to the castles. So basically, they would go out and recruit for Elizabeth these girls, and they were always between 10 to 14 years old. And they would say, hey, you're looking kind of ruggedy. How would you like to make some good cash? And they would bribe them with money and an official title to live to work at the castle, And this would be like a dream for almost all of these girls during this time period. I really guarantee you that. You have to understand the severity of what I'm saying here. I guarantee you, if somebody came up to them and said, would you like to work in that castle, because of their living situation and what it was like, I guarantee you they would jump on that faster than you could blink an eye, man. So anyways, Elizabeth later began killing daughters of lesser gentry who were sent to her school to learn etiquette. And a lot of abductions were said to happen. So the atrocities were described as being severe beatings, burnings, mutilation of the hands, biting of flesh, of their faces, arms, and other body parts, freezing and starving the girls to death. The use of needles were also mentioned by collaborators in court. There were many forms of torture used by Elizabeth and torture devices. The girls were burned with tongs and then they were placed in freezing water afterwards. She would cover them with live ants. Like basically she would put like sticky stuff like jellies and honey and stuff like that all over their bodies, and then she would have them covered with live ants. And then they would put the live ants on them. So Elizabeth would also said to use cannibalism, and she also drank their blood, as well as covered her whole body in the blood in her bathtub, and even would use the mud in the form of makeup. Some people named family members killed in the castle. Others described seeing traces of abuse and torture, some of which had been buried in graveyards while they were still alive, and others were buried in unmarked locations around Elizabeth's castle estate. So, two court officials, Benedict Diaso and Sakibi Salzavisi, claimed to have personally witnessed Elizabeth torturing and killing her victims in numerous locations. Now, these would have been two castle officials, my bad, not court, castle officials. And they said, man, we witnessed her killing and torturing people all over her castle and other places. So, several people were named for supplying Elizabeth with the young women by deception or purely by force. So, it is said that she killed 500 officially, and rumored to be as high as over 800 victims. Now, it was said that Thurzo went to the castle right after Christmas on December 30th, 1610, and caught Elizabeth red-handed in the act. Now, he said he arrested Elizabeth and 4 of her servants. However, and these servants' names were Dorota Semtes, Alina Joe, Katrina Benicia, and Janos Yurjavar. They said they found one girl dead, one dying, and reported that another woman was found wounded, while others were locked up. Countess Elizabeth was put under house arrest because of her status in the community, meaning she was royalty. They said, we're not going to keep her in a dungeon, we're not going to keep her in a jail, we're going to let her be in her house, but we're going to place her under house arrest. So, although it was commonly believed Elizabeth was caught in the act of torture, there is little evidence to actually support that. Originally, Thurzo said Elizabeth's guests and village people caught her red-handed, but later changed the story in court to I caught her red-handed. So it went from them to me. That's basically what happened there. However, she was actually arrested and detained prior to the discovery of her victims officially. So the little rumor that she was detained right then, that wasn't the case. She was actually detained prior to the discovery of all the evidence. So the story of Thurzo discovered Elizabeth naked in a tub, covered in the victim's blood, with the body tied up above her and her with a stake, was actually just fictional accounts and local people just trying to make more add more fuel to the story in the fire, so to speak, you know. So they did decide on a trial and execution would cause public scandal if they would go that route, as well as disgrace the noble family of the Bathory name. So to avoid that, at the time, they ruled Transylvania and Elizabeth's property would be seized by the crown. Originally, Thurzo, along with Paul and her 2 sons-in-laws, originally planned on Elizabeth to be taken to a nunnery. But accounts of her murder and her daughter's lesser nobility spread, and they decided to place her underneath house arrest, and with further punishment should be avoided. So the king urged the Thurzo to bring Elizabeth to trial and be put to death. Thurzo successfully, however, convinced the king such an act would be just adversely affect the nobility of the kingdom. So why go that way? So it was decided that Mathens would not have to repay his large debt to Elizabeth. That's right. The king owed Elizabeth money. Boom, boom. Hope you guys caught that. And the other guy. Anyways, so officially, two trials were held in the wake of Elizabeth's arrest. The first was held January 2nd, 1611, and the second on January 17, 1611. Dozens of witnesses and survivors, servants testified against her, which, naturally. The court also examined skeletons and cadaver parts that were found in the castle as evidence. The exact number of victims is unknown, but Dorado Senza and Fico reported 36 and 37 victims during their periods of service alone. Anna Joe and Katrina Benega estimated a number of 50 or higher. They lost count, they said. Many of Elizabeth's personnel estimated the number of bodies removed from the castle between 100 and 200, if not more. One servant who spoke at the trial as a witness said that that Elizabeth provided a list personally of 650 victims' names to him, and was said to be in Elizabeth's own handwriting. As the number of 650 could not be a proven count, the official court account remained steady at 80. So 650 was said to be written down by Elizabeth. One person was 100 and 200. Elizabeth said it was 650, but officials say, hey, we're going to roll with 80. So the location is unknown of this letter. So 32 letters were written by Elizabeth and stored in the Hungarian State Archive in Budapest. That's where you can see those. So Elizabeth was imprisoned in her castle and placed in solitary confinement, and she was kept in a bricked set of rooms with only a small slits left open to ventilation and passing of food back and forth. They didn't even want to open up the door and talk to her. They were just like, they had these small slits and they were like, here, and just giving them food, and because they didn't want to deal with her, you know what I mean? So they didn't want to open up the door. The girl didn't even have human contact after this. In fact, in her dungeon, I'll get to that in a minute. So, anyways, she was kept in a brick set of rooms with only a small slit left in the. So she remained confined there for 4 years until her death total. On August 21st, 1614, she complained to her bodyguard that her hands was just getting really cold. He said, hey, it's nothing. Just go lay down. She was found dead the next morning. The location of her body is still unknown to this day, officially. A lot of people say Elizabeth was the victim of a conspiracy. It's said that her arrest was largely politically motivated due to her massive wealth and ownership of the land, because you got to keep in mind she owned more than a king in Hungary. So escalating after the death of her husband. This theory is actually sound and content within Hungarian history at that time period, which was the fall of religious and political conflicts, especially related to the Ottoman Empire, the spread of Protestantism, and the extension to Habsburg power over Hungary. So, again, in this podcast episode, you get an interesting thing, and this is why I was struggling not to try to go into too soon, and that is the fact that Elizabeth Bathory was very young when she was married off, and a lot of people say she didn't actually commit these crimes. In fact, it's said that the person that her husband left to care for the estate, to care for the castle, to care for Elizabeth, it said that he simply wanted all of that land and estate to himself. So as soon as enough time passed, he launched with his little buddies within the system. He launched an official complaint against Elizabeth of murder just to get the land. Now, ironically, in an ironic twist, and I do say ironic twist for a reason, because he wanted to arrest Elizabeth for all that land and estate, right? So he went to the king with this official complaint, yeah? So, but the king was like, you know what? I owe Elizabeth a lot of money. She owns more land than me. You know what? I want the land, and I want the estate. That's what the king said. So together they came up with this whole scheme that stretched all the way down to Vienna to get all of her land and the estate. And that scheme involved the servants and everybody else in the community to get rid of her because she was the richest and wealthiest and most powerful woman, not just in Hungary. This stretched all the way to Transylvania and Romania. So she was one of the most powerful women in two countries and even bordering down to Vienna. And people did not like that. So they had to do something. What to do? What to do? So they come up with this theory that her family was involved in Satanism and witchcraft because that was a heated topic at the time, which is ironic because it's a heated topic now, witch hunts. Anyways, but I mean, so it was just an easy thing to sell. You know what I mean? And that got the ball rolling, so to speak. Hold on. So, anyways, that got the ball rolling. Now, what I find most disturbing is there is a theory that they managed to get hold of cadaver bodies to present that weren't even found in the castle. You know, no, there was no official record of them actually moving bodies from the castle. No official record exists of this happening at all. So, with that said, it's very highly plausible that they just got a hold of all these bodies to bring in there as evidence of these young bodies. Um, and they railroaded her, basically. Because her husband was gone. There was nobody to defend her. She was by herself. And the person that's supposed to protect her, he's trying to, get her land. So, that's the gist of the whole story. But the really messed up part about it all is that she was kept in that dungeon. I'm going to try to include a picture of it in the slideshow, but it was a little tiny room and even had a little crib for a baby. So what that tells me is at some point there was another little baby in there. And nobody wanted to physically touch her like I was just saying earlier. So the total amount of time that she was locked up in there, she was never once able to leave that room at all for any reason. And the messed up part about it, the really messed up part about it is it was in her own freaking house. You know what I'm saying? That would be like now that it is. It's equivalent to somebody, like you're going to court and a judge saying, you know what though? We decided that we're going to keep you in prison in your own house, but it's not going to be fun. We're going to keep you in this little tiny room. You're only going to have this little tiny slit about like this big to see. Y'all see how little that is? And that's going to be big enough there's going to be another little slit that's going to be just big enough for us to hand you food. And that's it. End of story. So that's messed up to me that she had to go through that. Now, a lot of people speculate, was there actually torture equipment in Elizabeth's castle? This comes up a lot. In fact, when I was doing the research, it came up a ton. Because it'd be like, one article states that there was all this torture equipment in the castle. One article states that there wasn't. Another article states that there was, but it was just left over from the empire, from, everything else. That they weren't actually being used at the time. Personally, I believe that Elizabeth did kill because I don't believe that many people that worked underneath her, mainly because of the Baroness testimony. I just don't believe it was as high as what they say. And I do believe that she was doing it because she did believe that it was curing her of her disease. Because that's what she was taught when she was little. I think that's the only thing. But then again, I can't sit here and say for certain because honestly, it does sound like she was railroaded. You know what I mean? You got a king that owes Elizabeth money. And that to me is crazy. That to me is absolutely crazy that a queen of Hungary is owed so much money by another king of by a king of another country after her husband is dying that they have no choice but to resort to this plan of seizing all this land. And that tells you something about her family stature and Transylvania stature during that time period. We're going to do another episode actually about somebody in Transylvania. I'm just not going to announce exactly when that will be. However, this has been on Elizabeth Bathory, and I did want to do one on her because she is one of my favorite people, because nobody knows for certain if she actually did these crimes or not. So, feel free to comment in the comment section of whether or not that you actually think that she did these crimes, because I am going to include the actual torture equipment that is now a tourist attraction in her current castle, what's left of it, I should say. And I'm going to include all of that. So that is there. But again, I want you guys to keep in mind that there is no hard evidence of that she actually utilized the torture equipment in her dungeon. There's no hard evidence of that. There's just speculation of that, of people that worked underneath her and church officials. Now, if you know history about the area of Transylvania, Hungary, Vienna, any surrounding areas during that time period of her life, then you would know that it is one of the most bloodiest time periods in that area for basically forever. It was a horrendous, just nonstop warfare. So everything is plausible. It's plausible she did it. It's plausible she didn't do it. It's plausible she got railroaded. There's conspiracy theories. Nobody knows for certain anything. But, here's another interesting thought. Nobody knows officially where Elizabeth Bathory is actually buried. Some people say that she's actually buried in a castle still in an unmarked grave, and nobody knows where. Other people say that her body was actually moved to a nunnery near Transylvania, and nobody knows exactly where this nunnery is or if her body's actually there. Now, other people say that she was tortured and then killed, mutilated, and then burned and the ashes spread. Other people say that she's just buried in an unmarked grave locally. So nobody knows exactly where she's actually buried at. And that's very significant because of the fact that she's royalty. By the fact that they actually made it to where when she was buried, that nobody knows where this queen's grave is. She was a queen. Now, I want you to keep in mind, we're not talking about a duchesses. We're not, and even them, it would be amazing that nobody knows. Even them with their statue, if you understand the royalty monarchy system, you would know that's highly significant that a country's queen, nobody's willing to give out information of where her body's actually at. That's highly significant about how people actually felt about about if she did these crimes or if she didn't do these crimes. Like I said, nobody knows for certain if she actually did. It's just speculation of a lot of hearsay and whatnot. And again, if I kind of rambled on there, sorry, my kids are off in the background doing something they're not supposed to be doing. But anyways, this has been Elizabeth Bathory. I'm sorry it's a little bit shorter than what I actually intended it to be. But again, like I said in my last episode, how I said I'm going to try to get a schedule. I am trying to get a schedule going. And now that the holidays are over with, things should start looking a lot better for the Working Class Thought Show anyways, for sure. And I did want to say that the next episode, I'm looking back on my notes here. Where did you go? Where did it go? So Albert Fish is my plan to do the next one. If it's not going to be Albert Fish, it's going to be one of the other ones that I requested. It's going to be like a surprised one. But I did want to go into Elizabeth Bathory because I feel like a lot of people don't know about her enough. A lot of people aren't giving them credit. A lot of people just assume that she's a horror movie character. I asked around a little bit before I did this episode, not with key listeners of the show. I wanted to get a different scope of people. And a lot of people knew about her from the movies, or they simply called her a vampire or a fictional character. So a lot of people, but surprised, I mean, it was surprising to me that a lot of people didn't know who she actually is. So I don't feel like there's enough information that's correct about her life. So I do want to say that, yes, it is common knowledge that she killed a bunch of people, but we do not know for certain if she actually did it or not. That's just the fact. Nobody can say. Nobody can say if she was railroaded to get her property and estates and it was divided between the king and the person that's supposed to be protecting her. Or if she actually did commit these crimes. And there is a cage in her castle that is still there. And what this cage was is they said that she would tie them above the bed, or not above the bed, above her tub. Naturally, she wouldn't. One of the servants would, but they would tie the cage and the person inside the cage, and then they would have these sticks with these arrows in them at the arrowheads at the end of them. And they said that Elizabeth would sit there with the stake and just stab them, and just let the whole tub fill with the victim's blood, and then bathe in the blood, as well as drink, and then later had the people cut them up, and to get rid of the evidence. And she would actually consume body parts that she favored. Often the body parts would be flesh, the face. At least that's what they claim. But again, I don't want to officially say that I don't want to officially say historically accurately that she did these crimes. Now you will hear people say that it's a fact that she did it, blah blah blah. But you'll hear other people who are actual historians actually argue the fact that nobody can say for certain if she did, because we have all of the royalty areas. You have Transylvania, Hungary, Vienna. You have all of these people at play to try to get her property, because she was queen of that area, and she, out of all of these important people, she had the most estate. She had the biggest estate. She had the most castles. She had the most of everything, and they wanted it. So nobody could say if she actually committed these atrocity crimes, or if she didn't, and it was speculated. Nobody knows for certain. I just want to throw that out there. So let me know how you feel. Let me know if you think she actually did commit these crimes, or if she was railroaded just to get her property, because a lot of people say she was, and I'm leaning towards that. When I was doing all of this research on it, I that was a conclusion I drew. It is highly plausible, highly plausible that Elizabeth was railroaded to get her property. I'm just saying, it really is. It's highly plausible that they just did that. I just want to throw that out there again. I can't emphasize that enough. But anyways, this has been Mike for Working Class Thoughts. Everybody have a great night. Peace, love, and good vibes as always.